Imagine a husband being shot in front of his wife by no other than his mistress. Crazy, right? Yes, this is the true story of Pastor Brodes Perry and how he unfortunately lost his life. Pastor Brodes Perry was a man admired by many, a third-generation leader in the Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis, Tennessee. At 36 years old, he carried on his family's legacy with passion and dedication, serving his community with zeal. Yet, behind the image of a devoted spiritual guide lay a hidden chapter of his life that would lead to his tragic downfall. Brodes was not always destined to be a pastor. Before answering the spiritual call, he had pursued a degree in business administration at Florida A&M in Tallahassee. His commitment to education shaped his outlook on life, and he was known for his sharp mind and ambition. But a deeper purpose began to stir within him. Feeling a pull toward helping others spiritually, he chose to follow the path his father and grandfather laid before him, becoming the third pastor in his family line. His role brought him admiration and respect within his congregation and beyond. Despite his successes in the pulpit, Brodes' personal life was far from perfect. His first marriage ended, a failure he carried as a silent burden. Yet love found him again when he met Tabitha, a kind-hearted woman who brought light into his life. They married and began a new chapter together, settling in Memphis to build a peaceful life. The community admired their union, seeing them as an example of faith and resilience. Brodes' life, on the surface, appeared to be flawless. He had achieved the success many envied, with a career that soared and a family that seemed picture-perfect to outsiders. Yet beneath this carefully constructed appearance, a darker truth lingered, one that only a select few knew. At the heart of this secret was an affair that threatened to unravel everything. Brodes had become entangled with Latoshia Daniels, a 39-year-old clinical social worker from Little Rock, Arkansas. Latoshia was a woman who had worked to carve out a place for herself in a world that often overlooked women like her. Highly educated and accomplished, she was known for her professionalism in the field of anger management. Her career was built on understanding people's deepest struggles, offering them guidance and support. But despite her success and the respect she commanded, Latoshia's personal life was complicated, and her feelings for Brodes were consuming. She had fallen in love with him, not out of any illusion or naive fantasy, but with the full knowledge that he was married. It was this awareness that made her connection with Brodes all the more intense and desperate. She had fallen for him not just for the man he was, but for the man he represented. Someone who seemed untouchable, someone who held power and influence. The affair that blossomed between them was not just physical, but deeply emotional, driven by a mix of longing, guilt, and a profound desire for something more than either of them could fully define. The chemistry between them was undeniable, sparking an all-consuming passion that neither could resist. As the affair deepened, so did the emotions tied to it. For Latoshia, it was a love tinged with both exhilaration and regret, while for Brodes, it was a dangerous mix of his own desires and a reckless disregard for the consequences. The relationship grew more complex, tangled in the webs of their conflicting emotions, and slowly, the line between love and obsession began to blur. Latoshia's love for Brodes became all-consuming. She saw him not just as a lover, but as a soulmate, a man she believed shared a connection beyond words. However, Brodes began to see the consequences of their actions. Racked with guilt and fear of discovery, he decided to end the affair, hoping to repair his marriage and protect his reputation. But the decision to break things off would have devastating consequences. On the evening of April 4th, 2019, the peaceful and comfortable life that Brodes and Tabitha had spent years building together in their quiet Memphis apartment was suddenly and violently torn apart. It was a typical evening at home for Tabitha. She had spent most of the day tending to her usual routines, settling into the calm of their apartment at Meridian Park, a place that had always felt like a safe sanctuary for her and her husband. But as the clock struck 10 p.m., everything was about to change. Tabitha was alone, relaxing in the quiet of their living room, when a sudden knock on the door broke the stillness. It wasn't a sound she was used to at this time of night, so it immediately caught her off guard. She hesitated for a moment, wondering who it could be, and then stood up to answer. When she opened the door, she was taken aback by the sight of Latoshia Daniels standing on the other side. Latoshia was someone Tabitha recognized, though she wasn't exactly a close friend. She had met Latoshia a few times through her husband Brodes, who had spoken about her in passing. A social worker by profession, Latoshia was always polite, well-spoken, and someone who seemed to have a strong sense of composure. There was nothing outwardly alarming about her presence, and Tabitha, seeing no reason to feel uneasy, smiled and greeted her warmly. "Latoshia, what brings you here?" Tabitha asked, slightly curious but still calm. Latoshia's expression was guarded, but she smiled back, offering an explanation that felt somewhat offbeat for a casual visit at this hour. She said she had something important to discuss with Brodes, though, for reasons unknown to Tabitha, he hadn't been available. She hadn't called ahead, but had come in person instead. Although it struck Tabitha as unusual, there was no immediate reason for concern. Perhaps Latoshia simply needed to talk about something work-related or had some kind of favor to ask. Figuring that she was merely an acquaintance of Brodes and therefore harmless, Tabitha did what she thought was the right thing. She invited her in. The evening, which had begun like any other, was about to take a sharp and unexpected turn. As they waited for Brodes to return home, the two women engaged in casual conversation. Tabitha felt uneasy but couldn't pinpoint why. Latoshia's demeanor was calm, but there was an underlying tension that unsettled her. When Brodes arrived 30 minutes later, Latoshia's behavior became even more peculiar. The three sat together, but the conversation was strained, filled with awkward pauses and subtle glances. Finally, Latoshia signaled that it was time for her to leave. As Tabitha and Brodes stood to walk her to the door, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Latoshia turned abruptly, pulling a gun from her jacket. "You broke my heart," she screamed, aiming the weapon at Brodes. The atmosphere in the apartment shifted dramatically the moment Latasha pulled the gun from her bag. The calm and quiet that had surrounded the evening was shattered, replaced by a deafening tension that seemed to stretch every moment into eternity. The air was thick with a mix of confusion and dread as Tabitha stood frozen in the doorway, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of the rapidly escalating situation. Latasha's hand was steady as she aimed the weapon, her eyes filled with a mix of pain, rage, and betrayal. There was no warning, no words exchanged before she pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, echoing through the apartment, followed by the sickening thud of the bullet embedding itself into the wall just inches away from Brodes. His eyes widened in shock as he instinctively tried to retreat. But before he could fully react, Latasha fired again. The next shot found its mark, striking him in the chest. The force of the impact knocked him backward, and he stumbled, collapsing to the ground with a gasp. Brodes never had a chance to defend himself. The subsequent shots rang out like thunderclaps, each one a painful punctuation of Latasha's fury. The sound was overwhelming, rapid, sharp, and relentless. Tabitha's scream sliced through the noise as she watched her husband crumple to the floor, blood spreading across the hardwood like a dark, spreading stain. It all happened so fast that her mind struggled to catch up. The world seemed to slow as she took in the horror of what had just unfolded in front of her eyes. She rushed to Brodes' side, but her hands trembled too much to offer any real assistance. His body was already lifeless, his face frozen in an expression of shock and disbelief. The reality of the situation crashed down on Tabitha with the force of a tidal wave, overwhelming her senses and leaving her gasping for breath. But there was no time to process what had just happened. Her body moved on instinct, fueled by a primal fear that numbed her mind to the gravity of the situation. Latasha stood a few feet away, the gun still in her hand, her chest heaving with each breath. Her face was a mask of anguish, torn between the overwhelming emotion of her actions and the bitter satisfaction of having finally taken control of her pain. It was clear that this was not just a moment of violence, it was the culmination of months, perhaps even years, of hurt and heartbreak that had been simmering beneath the surface, ready to boil over. Tabitha's mind raced. She couldn't fathom the motives behind this sudden explosion of violence. She had never suspected that Latasha harbored such intense feelings for Brodes, let alone the depths of jealousy, anger, and betrayal that had driven her to this point. Yet in the midst of the chaos, there was no time for explanations, no opportunity to ask why. All that mattered now was the man she had loved, the man who lay before her, lifeless and cold, and the woman who had taken everything from her in the blink of an eye. Latoshia's rage was uncontrollable. She continued yelling, "You broke my heart," as she fired more rounds into Brodes' body. Tabitha, desperate to save her husband, tried to intervene but was helpless against Latoshia's fury. With every shot, the love and trust Brodes had built with his congregation and family were shattered. As Latoshia ran out of ammunition, she momentarily left the apartment, giving Tabitha a glimmer of hope. Seizing the opportunity, Tabitha rushed to a neighbor's door, banging and screaming for help. But before anyone could come to her aid, Latoshia re-entered the apartment, reloading her gun with chilling determination. Tabitha's bravery nearly cost her life. While she checked on her husband, Latoshia turned the gun on her, shooting her in the shoulder. The pain was excruciating, but Tabitha's will to survive pushed her forward. Despite her injuries, she managed to escape to another neighbor's apartment where she collapsed and begged for help. Meanwhile, Latoshia remained at the scene, her mind seemingly trapped between shock and a refusal to leave. When police arrived, they found her still holding the gun, her emotions laid bare for all to see. Officers ordered her to drop the weapon, but she resisted, forcing them to use non-lethal force to subdue her. Even after being restrained, Latoshia's defiance continued. She fought against the officers, her rage spilling over into physical resistance. She was eventually transported to a nearby hospital for treatment, but attempted to escape, running through the hospital hallways before being apprehended again. Her actions only added to the mounting charges against her. The police investigation began to uncover the shocking truth about the relationship between Latoshia and Brodes. It became clear that their affair had been more than momentary fling. Latoshia had deeply invested her emotions in the relationship, believing that Brodes shared her feelings. When he ended things, the betrayal cut her to the core, pushing her to the breaking point. As the news of Brodes' death spread, the community was left in shock and disbelief. How could a man so devoted to his faith and his congregation lead such a double life? The revelations about his affair with Latoshia sent a shock through the church, shattering the trust many had placed in him. Tabitha's survival was a small mercy in an otherwise tragic story. She faced a long road to recovery, both physically and emotionally. The loss of her husband, coupled with the betrayal of his infidelity, left her grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. She leaned on her faith and the support of her community to navigate the difficult days ahead. Latoshia, meanwhile, faced the full weight of the law. She was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Brodes and attempted first-degree murder for shooting Tabitha. Additional charges included resisting arrest and assaulting police officers. Her actions painted a picture of a woman driven to the brink by heartbreak and betrayal, but the justice system showed no leniency. The investigation into the case revealed more details about the relationship between Brodes and Latoshia. It was clear that their affair had been a crazy one, filled with intense emotions and conflicting loyalties. Latoshia's pregnancy added another layer of complexity to the story, raising questions about what might have been if circumstances had been different. In the wake of the tragedy, Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church struggled to move forward. The loss of their pastor, combined with the scandal surrounding his death, left a lasting impact on the congregation. Many people found themselves struggling to reconcile the two opposing facets of Brodes' life. On one hand, he was a man who had dedicated himself to the spiritual upliftment of his community. offering guidance, comfort, and hope to countless individuals who turned to him in their times of need. He had stood in the pulpit as a beacon of faith, delivering powerful sermons that stirred hearts and transformed lives. His leadership and devotion had left an indelible mark on his congregation, painting him as a model of moral and spiritual strength. Yet, on the other hand, Brodes had made deeply personal choices that ultimately unraveled his life and tarnished his legacy. The revelation of his secret relationship shocked those who had once placed him on a pedestal. It was a sobering reminder of his humanity, of his vulnerability to the same temptations and mistakes that plague everyone. For many, this duality created a painful inner conflict. How could someone so devoted to spreading God's word allow themselves to falter in such a profound way? The community was left wrestling with complex emotions. Some were filled with sorrow and compassion, recognizing that even the most righteous among us are not immune to human flaws. Others felt betrayed, unable to reconcile the image of the pastor they revered with the man who had succumbed to decisions that led to such a tragic end. In trying to process their feelings, they were forced to confront their own beliefs about forgiveness, accountability, and the capacity for redemption. Brodes's life and death became a symbol of the complexity of human existence, how one person can be a source of immense good while simultaneously being burdened by choices that carry devastating consequences. His story was a reminder of the fragile balance between the ideals we aim for and the flaws that make us human. For Tabitha, the path to healing was slow but steady. She chose to focus on preserving Brodes's positive legacy while coming to terms with the pain he had caused. Her resilience became a source of inspiration for those around her, and evidence of the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. The sad story of Pastor Brodes Perry serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of hidden truths and unchecked emotions. It is a sad tale of love, betrayal, and the devastating cost of choices made in moments of weakness. Above all, it highlights the fragility of the human heart and the lengths to which people will go when it is broken.